Hi, guys. Welcome to the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy podcast. We are here weekly working at simplifying things in our lives one day at a time, one simple step at a time. And this way of simplifying things, this way of working at eliminating some of the junk in our lives, whether it's food or the way we spend our time, it doesn't make things easier, but it definitely makes them better. I'm your host, Michelle Visser, and today I'm talking with someone who knows exactly what we're talking about when it comes to sweeteners. Hilary Kearney does not take the easy way out when it comes to sweetening her food and helping others do the same. Before we dive in and before I tell you a little bit about Hilary, I do want to tell you, make sure you listen to the end today, because right at the end, Hillary slipped something in there that I didn't see coming. It's a fascinating fact about bees that science has literally just found out. It is so new that it didn't even make it into her brand new, just released this week book. That's how new this scientific study is that she talks about. So stick with us to the end, because if you think it's a fascinating episode about bees, wait till you get there. Um, Also, I want to make sure that you know, Hillary and I talked after we were done recording, and we hatched a plan. We are doing a really fun giveaway. You can just go follow both of us on Instagram. You can find Hillary at Girl Next Door Honey on Instagram. And of course, you can find me at solely.rested on Instagram. But if you're not on Instagram, you still need to check out this giveaway. Go to solelyrested.com/honey, HONEY, and find out this really sweet, amazing stuff that we are giving away. Hillary's brand new book, my book, and we each are going to teach the winner how to produce honey and how to make maple syrup. And Hillary's throwing in some of her amazing honey. Seriously, just go check it out. solelyrested.com/honey. Also, another big exciting thing that just happened, the doors just flew open to Dehydrating Academy. And I just set up a special code just for you guys. This offer is nowhere else. It's just for podcast listeners. Use code PODCAST, PODCAST, over at solelyrested.com/dehydrate. Enjoy a huge slashed discount on Dehydrating Academy and start enjoying preserving your food, and find out amazing ways to do it that will save you time and money, and find out then how to rehydrate it and use it in ways your family will go crazy over. You're going to love it. solelyrested.com/dehydrate. Join Dehydrating Academy. Before we dive into this episode, I have a quick question for you. What do you think might be the most underrated crop in the average garden? I think it's garlic. This was the first year I planted garlic, and I'm in love. Go to territorialseed.com/simple to see what I'm talking about and grab a discount code. I love the fact that you can plant garlic in the fall when it's a slower time, not in the craziness of spring. And I love that there's two options to choose from: hardneck, which gives you a spicier flavor, and two, harvest, because you can harvest the scapes before the garlic. But the soft neck garlic gives you a longer shelf life. So you know what? I recommend you try some of both. territorialseed.com/simple. It's also a fantastic companion plant. I planted mine by my broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and it has helped repel the cabbage moths all summer long. Don't wait though, because the garlic will sell out quickly. It does every year. If you wait, it might be gone next week. So go to territorialseed.com/simple and take advantage of the discount as well. Okay, now let me tell you about Hilary. Hilary Kearney is the author of the just released book, Heart of the Hive. She's also written two other books, and she owns a beekeeping business. It offers educational opportunities to hundreds of new beekeepers every year. And she rescues wild bee colonies, and she manages somewhere around 90 hives in her hometown of San Diego, California. She did tell me before we hit the record button that she wasn't really sure exactly the number of it, but it was somewhere around 90. It's a lot of hives. She knows the stuff. about bees. Let's bring her on. So, Hillary, I'm so glad that you could be with us today. When I got a copy of your book, I seriously was like, if I didn't even care about bees, this is gorgeous. Like, it's so gorgeous. I wanted to dive in. And then I started reading it. And like, are you like, I don't know, do you have you must have a degree in language arts because your writing is beautiful. Like you're quite the author. I mean, you take bees and you literally describe them like a symphony. You did that and you did that in a whole chapter. Like it's gorgeous. Everything from the photos to the words. People even if they didn't know they were interested in bees, I really think they should get a copy of Heart of the Hive because it's gorgeous. So, you put a lot into this and this is your third book.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other 2 are also about bees?
Yes, my first book was called Queen Spotting, and it's more of a there's not as much writing in that book, because it's kind of like Where's Waldo, but with bees, and you have to find the queen, and there's, like, 48 images that unfold, and you look for her,
Oh,
and
so
then
is it mainly for beekeepers
it's
to be able to
mainly for
identify queens?
beekeepers, but anyone could
Okay.
probably enjoy it, like, kids really like it. So I think it's really good for, like, if you wanna teach your kids about bees and, do, like, homeschooling, like, for homeschoolers for sure,
Yeah, yeah.
teachers. Yeah, and then the other one is this little illustrated guide to, like, all kinds of bees, and there's a lot of info in there, but it's much lighter. So it's more
Okay,
of, like, a tabletop kind of book. Whereas this book is a lot more in-depth, nature writing, so it was definitely a challenge to write it. It took me, like, 3 years to
mhm.
research and write all that. I also started right after having my first, baby, and it was
Yeah,
2022 on top of that, so
yeah.
all the
So
things.
you will be recovering for a while.
Yeah. But, yeah, I'm
Oh,
really proud of it, and I don't actually have a degree in writing, but, I studied art, and I took a lot of creative writing classes. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and I
okay,
took a lot of creative writing classes. I probably should have minored in it, but I just didn't think to do it. I just took the classes, like, kind of for fun. It's always been, like, a hobby, but I didn't really take it
right.
seriously, like, I never thought of write a book kinda thing.
Right. Right. Well, you literally proved that you don't need to go to college to do it, to do it. So, okay. So tell us, what is Girl Next Door Honey?
So that's my business that I started in 2012 here in San Diego. It's a beekeeping business, and so I like to do a lot of education. So I teach new beekeepers, I do classes, I give talks to like local clubs, like gardening clubs and stuff, and classroom visits for kids. And then I also do bee rescues. So people call me when a swarm of bees lands in their yard or moves into the wall of their house, or
Oh, wow.
they go all kinds of crazy places. So that's the really fun part because you just never know what kind of call you're gonna get that day. Like,
I mean, most people, Hillary, wouldn't say that's fun. I don't know, but
yeah, but
but
I get to
okay.
go to so many cool places. Like I've done removals. I did a removal on an aircraft carrier. I get to go up in like a cherry
Wow.
picker. I did one at the Playhouse here in Balboa Park, like right before a
Huh.
Shakespeare play. They had an emergency. Swarm had landed. I had to get him out of there before the play started. Um,
And the people are like, I don't remember a beekeeper in Shakespeare. What's going on here?
he does reference these though.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. I'm sure. Do you have someone helping you do this? This isn't just you by yourself.
It's for a long time it was just me by myself, but when I
Wow.
got pregnant, I really had to force myself to relinquish and delegate. So
Mhm.
I have one helper. I just brought on a couple more helpers because I'm actually pregnant again right now. So
Oh, congratulations.
thanks. Yeah. So I have some helpers now. I always have kind of like a pool of students that I'm teaching on like an ongoing thing. So a lot of times I'll bring people with me to shadow me if they're I do like a mentorship program. And so if I'm doing
Okay.
something, I'll say, hey, you guys, I'm doing this today. Does anyone want to tag along? And then I make them carry all my stuff for me. And, you know,
Okay. Wow. I'm just picturing this and I'm laughing. Um, so okay, I should say, I was surprised when I reached out and I asked you, "Well, tell me a little about yourself before you come on the show." And I would have had no way of knowing otherwise that we actually have some things in common. We both live in very old houses. Mine actually was built sometime around 1840, we believe, and yours is
Ooh,
1880s, you said.
yeah.
We both now, are you a gardener? You did say you have a big garden. Are
No,
you a
I'm a
gardener?
gardener.
Okay, yeah, so we're both very much gardeners. I have 3 large gardens, and we both have chickens. You told me you have chickens, so I'm going, "Oh, we have a lot in common." And then we also both have apiaries, but that's where it stops because I know nothing about bees. It is entirely my husband's thing, and I just, like, watch him put on his suit and take a few pictures and think it's cool, but I have no idea what he's doing.
Well, maybe then
So
you'll know after reading the book.
yes, that's what I'm hoping. That's what I was excited because honestly, I love him to death. We've been married 30 years, but he literally is not a teacher, very much unlike you. I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds like you literally live to teach from what you're saying.
Yeah,
And
no, it's like a natural
he's
instinct for me, I don't know.
yeah, yeah. And it's the exact opposite for him. Like if I tried to pull it out of him, like I asked 25 questions, he just is not a teacher. And I gave up a long time ago. So I'm excited to learn from you about bees today. So thank you. Even though I have an apiary, I need to learn from you.
It's funny because the beekeeping community is so, eccentric, and all of us are the same in some ways, but, there's a lot of unique people in there, and I think,
Mhm.
as, like, a general stereotype, a lot of beekeepers are not very good at communicating, and
Oh, really? Okay.
I kind of think that's why they like working bees because you get to connect in this, like, nonverbal way with these
Mm,
animals and
mm,
feel that connection, and just many different senses or take place with that. And
mhm.
it's like an alternative. Like, there's a lot of beekeepers who are like on the spectrum, for example, and
Interesting.
I think I think it's really interesting because when I started beekeeping, I noticed that right away that there were all these beekeepers. Their websites were like black with like yellow writing, like hard to read, just paragraphs of just rambling about bees. I have no idea what they're saying, just very inaccessible. And I thought, here, I can take this and make it accessible to people. And that
Mm.
could be my thing, as in contrast to like the standard um
Wow.
practice,
Well, you like I said earlier, you've proven you could do it because that's exactly what you've done. I absolutely love it. In your intro of your book, you mentioned that honeybees can be a gateway bug,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking that maybe that was even like your purpose in writing this book, but tell me, what do you mean by that?
Um, well, that's just something I actually came up with that through like my experiences on social media because I want to say I was one of the first people on Instagram to use that platform to teach people about bees. So, like, there
Oh,
were other
wow.
beekeepers on there, maybe, but they weren't necessarily posting about their experiences in an educational way. So, that
Mm,
was one of the first ways that I started, like, having an audience that was bigger than just my local people, classes, and stuff.
yeah. Yeah.
And, it was just like an instinctual thing to wanna teach people this thing that I was excited about and so fascinated about, so I'm sharing, like, pictures and snippets of things that I'm doing and things that I'm learning about bees, um, and I realized in myself that, when I first started beekeeping, I'm like a Southern California girl, like, I grew up on the beach, I don't have any agricultural connections, like, there's no like, it just came out of the blue for me. I just picked up a book
Mm,
by chance and became fascinated with the
hmm.
behavior of honeybees. But
Wow.
yeah, I realized that through bees, I was now becoming more interested in other insects and other type species of bees. It made me like question all of my biases, so I kind of
Mhm.
looked at these animals that I had written off or that I was not interested in and went, I bet
Mm.
every single one of these is just as fascinating as bees are, and in their own way,
Yeah.
and maybe we don't even know about them yet. And so
Yeah.
that kind of just opened my eyes, and I started realizing that honeybees are so um, charismatic and interesting that you can really use them to grab people's attention. And then once they love honeybees, I feel like the same thing happens where they start kind of looking
Mm,
at everything differently and thinking differently about what we share the planet with. And so that's kind of like my larger mission, I guess, is that to
mm.
use honeybees as a way to get people to start um, seeing that we're sharing this space and what can we do to like make room for everything and try to minimize our harm to everything everything that is we're
Yeah.
sharing with.
And, I hadn't thought about it till something you just said that bees really do kind of have the bad rap. I mean, a lot of people are terrified of them. They're just always worried about getting stung. Obviously, I have a 2-year-old granddaughter who is very afraid of them, and I was trying to explain to her and I realized I needed to work on it because it's kind of hard with the 2-year-old.
Yeah.
I was trying to explain to her that we wouldn't have our flowers if it wasn't for the and it's not going to hurt you, but um but that's a really good point that people are afraid of them and instead these things are amazing. And in fact, you make the hive seem like a soap opera the way that you write about it.
It is. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah. And you just mentioned too that there are a lot of different species of bees. Tell us about that. I did not know that. You say in the book that there are more than 20,000 species of bees. Is that right?
Yeah. It's kind of mind blowing because that's more different species of bees than if you combined all the mammals and birds on Earth. Um,
It's insane.
Right. And the reason we need so many species of bees is because we have so many species of plants. So like
Okay.
honeybees are like a very dominant pollinator, because in part because of their superorganism, because they live in this colony with thousands of bees and the way they organize themselves, and they can really just kind of dominate a landscape and do a lot of pollination work, but they aren't always the best pollinator of each plant. So a lot of these native bee species have a more specific relationship with certain plants where they're very good at pollinating like a certain family of plants. Like
Wow.
one of my favorite bees is the squash bee, which we only have in North America, I believe. And it's actually migrating like further and further north because it's following the pumpkins that we grow and the different squash that we're growing because it only collects it only pollinates those flowers. Like it has a very tied relationship. So it emerges
Wow.
when those flowers become available. It goes into like dormancy when the flowers are no longer available. So a lot of these are only active for like a tiny part of the year in correlation with a certain group of plants that they're
Wow. Well,
mainly
how do they
responsible.
survive the rest of the year, though? I
They're
I
kind
wouldn't
of
think they'd
they
get enough.
yeah, their life cycle is usually such that they kind of mate and lay eggs and then die, and then their eggs emerge the following season. But some of them are
Mm,
actually alive, under they live more than 1 year and will live in kind of a hibernation state and come back out again. So it just there's
mm,
so many different species, there's so many different ways that they all live, and we know very little about them because there's so many. Like there, it's very you could
mm.
we could have a ton of people dedicating time to studying each one and find out so much new stuff, but there's no money in that. So it's
Sure. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
for the
Um,
joy of learning, but
okay. Bees are just, I mean, I knew it already, but just glancing at your book, I'm realizing they're so complex. And just hearing this about the squash bee, I'm going, wait a minute. Tell us, I have a feeling you wouldn't even know where to start with this, but can you give us a list of things that, like, how do I say it? We know about bees, but yet we have no idea what it means. Like in your book, for instance, you mentioned that we know that they have the three simple eyes, right?
Mhm.
And we have an idea of what those eyes are for, but we really aren't sure. Or you show worker bees, I guess not you, the photographer shows worker bees with their antennas crossed. And you mention, we know they're communicating, but we don't know what this means. There's so many things like that. Like, can you just rattle off? They're so
Yeah.
complex. What do we not know about bees?
So many things. Like their communication is a very big part of it. Like we only recently started looking into the fact that we know that bees communicate like through dance, and we know that but what we recently realized that they're also communicating through vibrations at the same
Yeah.
time. So as they're doing those dances, they're
Mm.
sending vibratory signals to each other through the comb, which they feel through their feet. And we
Wow.
barely understand that. And there could be vibrations happening all the time that are communications that we haven't pulled out yet. And one of the complications of studying this is that there's so many bees, and how are they sending these vibratory signals to each other and picking them up without like getting them mixed with each other, right? Like how are they,
Right.
because
Yeah.
to us it's just like this jumble of vibrations, and it's hard to
Yeah.
tell. So there's a lot of stuff about the vibratory signals that we don't know. There's also like one of the really interesting things that I think is about the drones and how they find these mating congregation areas. So the drones are the male bees, and every afternoon they leave the hive to go mate with a queen from another hive. a lot of people get confused. They think the drones would mate with their own queen, but that's their mother. So you have to think of the queen bee as like the mother of all the bees in the hive. So these male bees are her sons, and they're leaving to go pass on her genes, the colony's genes, to another colony by mating with a queen.
Wow. I
And
didn't know that.
they go to these special areas, which we call DCAs, drone congregation areas, that are aerial sites where they just circle in the air for like
Hmm.
up to 30 minutes at a time and then fly back and refuel and rest and then go back out again. And that's their job. And they're waiting to hope that a queen comes along that they can mate with. But these are drones from like, all these different colonies nearby. And we don't know how they find and agree upon this
Yeah.
location.
Who decides, hey, let's meet here tonight?
One of the wildest things is that these locations remain constant for decades or centuries sometimes.
No way.
Yeah, so I
Wow.
can't remember the exact date. It's in the book somewhere, but there was a written recording, like a written record from someone from like the 1700s or so 1800s about a drone congregation site, which he describes, and you can tell that's what he's talking about.
But he
And
doesn't know
that
what's going on, probably,
he
right?
probably didn't know what was going on,
Yeah.
but it's still there today. Like, it still happens every year. They go to that same location. The drones are still gathering there. So we don't know
Wow.
how they find those locations, how they choose them. And these drones don't
And
live
here we are with restaurants closing like every every few months, right? We don't
near
even know where to
Google
go eat.
Maps.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So we don't
Huh.
know how they choose those locations, and we don't know how they find them again, because those all the drones that have gone before are dead. And then new drones emerge the following spring and find those same sites again, even though there was no drones present to teach them.
That's insane.
Yeah, so we don't
Wow.
know, and that's one of the things that kind of blows my mind with that one.
I got a quick question for you. Are you feeling stressed? Fall is such a busy time of year. It tends to really stress me out. But sitting down with a delicious cup of tea, that's my me time that I need. It's my relaxed time. And on top of that, tea contains antioxidants, flavonoids, amino acids. It's actually really good for us, especially if you're choosing the good stuff, organic, loose leaf teas. But let me take the guesswork out of it for you and just go to solelyrested.com/fall, FALL, and go try one or heck, two or all of my favorite drinks. This time of year, I share all the recipes with you. They are so easy to make and they're good for you. And don't miss the discount codes while you're there. Solelyrested.com/fall, FALL. Okay, guys, if we're concerned about the nutrient quality of our food, we really need to think about the nutrient quality of our soil if we're growing some of our own food as well. I really can't recommend cover crops enough. They've kind of revolutionized the way that I garden. Cover crops are a living mulch. They suppress weeds, they attract beneficial insects, they control erosion, they hold moisture into the soil. And when the cover crops decay, they give nutrients back to the soil. So those nutrients are there and ready for my garden next spring. Go to solelyrested.com/cover and find out what cover crops I recommend. Also, you'll find a really great cover crop guide that I link to at solelyrested.com/cover. Wow. That's crazy. See, I knew it would be a good question to ask you because I knew you'd come out with something I would have never even thought to ask. Who would think to ask about that? Interesting. Okay. Some things that I gathered by reading through your book that I thought were crazy that I thought I would ask you to explain about. First of all, wait a minute. Bees have hair on their eyes?
Yeah.
Tell me about
Like
that.
intense eyelashes. But basically because they're going and burying their face in pollen and, getting this debris. When they fly through the air, they're also picking up particles. And so they have
Hmm.
to have the hair on their eyes to protect the eyes from getting crap in it. So just like our eyelashes do that, but you have to imagine, like, if we went and were like shoving our faces in pollen and flying through the air, like, we probably need more protection than this. So it just covers the whole surface of their eyes. And one of my fun facts I
Wow.
like to tell kids is they have about 3 million hairs, which is the same amount of hair that a squirrel has, but they're
Wow,
like a
a
tiny
little
bee.
bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. Okay, so as you're saying that, I'm picking up the book because I remembered I wanted to actually read this sentence to just show that you are literally like the Shakespearean author of bees, okay? The eyes of a honeybee are warm and chocolatey. They curve around the sides of the bee's head and seem to gaze from every angle like the Mona Lisa. I thought that was worth quoting. But I've always been fascinated by their eyes. As a photographer, I'm not like an intense photographer. I definitely could not take photographs like, what is his name? Eric, the photographer for your book.
Turner.
Turner,
You're not
yeah, the amazing French photographer. But I've always wanted to get a really cool picture showing their compound eyes because I think they're amazing, but I never would have thought of describing them the way you did. So,
Yeah, I always
um,
feel really pleased when I can pick up the hairs on their eyes. So, like, if I'm taking a picture of a bee and you can see
yeah.
the hairs on the eye, I'm like, "Yes."
See, you're
'Cause I'll
beyond
get
me. I have not done that. I have not noticed the hairs on the eyes. Who knew? And you also talk about how all those hairs, like you said, they're picking up the debris. They're picking up, to be eloquent like you, I think you said crap. They're
yeah.
picking up all the crap, right? uh, and then they go and clean themselves. And you said they can do that in 3 minutes or less. And they shed, I think it was 15,000, what, grams of pollen or grains of pollen or something. Um, so that's pretty crazy because I don't know, I take a 15-minute shower. I couldn't do it in 3, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's really if you take the time to look at bees on flowers, you can actually see this happening, and it's really fun to watch, like, if especially after you've read the text, because you can see what I'm describing, and one of the things that I always think of is, like, their front arms, like, their forearms, have these, spiny hairs that are meant to quickly fling that pollen off. And so they use them kind of like windshield wipers. So you imagine their eyes are here and they're covered in pollen and they can't, it's obstructing their view. And so usually before they take off from the flower, they kind of do this. They go
Oh,
like
yeah.
windshield wipers across their eyes. So
Yeah.
they clear all that pollen really quick. Sometimes they'll do it like they'll hover above the flower and you'll see them kind of pausing and just cleaning their heads because that's where all their
Mhm.
sensory organs are, their antenna, their eyes, their mouth. So they're kind of
Oh,
cleaning that and then going to the next flower. And then
okay.
eventually they clean their bodies at some point. But that it's
Mhm.
good that they're getting pollen all over themselves because that's how they're spreading pollen from flower to flower and
Of
pollinating.
course.
So
Us gardeners,
because it's like
we are indebted to them.
right, it's like two
Yeah.
different types of hairs, right? The ones that are collecting the pollen and the ones that are flinging the pollen off.
Right. Right. So the ones that they're collecting it with, like, they have those little, what is it called? Is it literally called a pollen basket on their feet? Like,
Yeah.
that is not gonna get rubbed off back on the flowers, that stays there somehow?
Yeah, so they have this kind of indent in their back legs that beekeepers call pollen baskets. I like to call them pollen pants because I just think it's funnier. Um,
So you get alliteration that way.
yeah, so it's like a bowl that holds like a wad of pollen. And so as they're combing the pollen off of themselves, they're mixing it with saliva and nectar or sticky things to make it more like a dough. And then they're kind of clumping it on their back leg. And then
Oh,
that's
so
very
they are putting it there. I didn't know that. I thought it collected there naturally. They're sticking it
no, they're
there.
sticking it there, and they
Oh,
have all these cool, like, mechanisms in their legs to do that, and then they carry it back to the hive, they're actually storing it in we think of honeycomb as just being for honey, but they also store pollen in there, they also raise babies in there, and then it's used for
yeah.
communication, so it's more complex than that.
Yeah, for sure. Just the honey's the part we wanna remember because it's so delicious.
I think Winnie the Pooh really wrecked that for us because you Winnie the Pooh goes into like the honey cave and everything's just like dripping or in honey around. It's like
Yeah,
so inaccurate, but you know,
very much.
people think
Yeah.
that's what's happening.
Yeah, very much not. Um, Back to the grooming though, you also mentioned you taught me about grooming bees. I didn't know there were grooming bees, but what I thought was crazy was how they actually have built up naturally more immunity than the other bees. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I don't know if we know how or why this happens because
Mhm.
that's another thing we don't understand is how do these jobs get assigned? And are some of them genetic? Because some of them are associated with actual physiological differences in the bodies of the bees. And sometimes those physiological changes happen only once the bee starts doing that job. So,
Oh, interesting.
right. And so, like, I don't know if that's the case for the groomer bees, but what I read in this very dense research paper was that there's immunity genes or immunity something in the blood that keeps the bees healthy. In terms of all insects, honeybees actually have an incredibly low amount of this in their blood. They're kind of at a
Mm,
disadvantage,
mm.
but these groomer bees have a higher amount than the other
Mm.
bees in the hive. Which makes sense because they are grooming bees and exposing themselves to a lot more pathogens and
Right.
microbes.
That's what I thought, that, oh,
Right.
they've built up their immunity because they've been, doing all this cleaning and having all these bad bacterias in their system or whatever. But from what you just said, maybe it could be the other way around?
It could
That
be that they
maybe
start out with it, that it's something
yeah,
or it's triggered
interesting.
by something we don't know, like, I'm not the paper didn't really explore, like, how or why, it's just we know that
Right,
this happens, but we don't know, is it because they're being exposed or is it before, you know? Because if
right.
it's because they're being exposed, it just kind of it's like, well, why don't all the bees have more then? You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like they're all touching
Yeah,
each other all the time. Just
right,
not necessarily like specifically grooming each other intensely like these groomer bees are. So I don't know. It's
right.
really interesting to think about this stuff. And, as more research comes out, we find out new things all the time. But to
Yeah.
me, immediately came to mind like, a lot of times we look at honeybees and to get clues about ourselves, our own immunity. One of the
Mhm.
craziest things I've read about honeybees is like this is kind of related to the job thing, which is that honeybees start out with jobs that happen inside the hive. They're groomer bees, they're cleaning up the hive, they're taking care of babies, they're building comb, and then halfway through their lives they graduate to foraging. The bees that leave the hive go to flowers, and their whole kind of thing changes, like the way they sleep changes, their level of venom gets higher, like all these things kind of shift when that happens. And so these scientists, what they did, it was what would happen to these bees bodies if we removed like all of the young bees in the hive and some of them went back to doing the jobs of their youth. So we know that the younger bees have like better cognitive abilities, and as they get
Mm,
older, their bodies deteriorate, their wings get all tattered, and they actually lose some cognitive function. So similar
mm,
to humans, right? There we get
mhm.
worn out.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so what they did is they removed all the young bees. And the way the colony responded was that they had old bees go back to doing the jobs of the younger bees, and then they
And were
tested.
they able to?
Yes, they were able to, and they were able to survive and just like do all these jobs again. And then they tested their cognitive abilities and found that they regained cognitive abilities by going back.
How
So they
cool.
actually like grew younger physiologically. Um,
Wow.
and so that's like, wait a minute, could that work for us? I know
Exactly, my wheels are spinning.
you hear
Yeah.
you hear older people all the time talking about how spending time with kids and young people keeps them young,
Rejuvenates
keeps them
them,
active. You
yes.
hear about how like women who have children later in life live longer and
Yes.
those kind of things. It's because you're still interacting and relevant and needed, versus being isolated, from society. So I think that's
Right.
really, really interesting. And there might be some correlations there between us. And there's all kinds of things like that with bees. And that's
Mm.
one of the reasons that they're so studied.
Yeah, that's that's really cool. Um, and you talk too about the memorization, like you were talking about cognitive abilities. I didn't realize that they not only memorize how to get to the flowers that they're going to eat the nectar from that day and how to get back, and they're memorizing their markers that they're seeing along their way. And then, of course, they're telling the other bees this. But you even pointed out that some flowers only produce nectar certain times of the day. So
Hmm.
they even have to memorize that fact about what time of the day they're going to these places that they're recounting.
Yeah, it's so impressive and just mind blowing because they're traveling. like up to 3 miles away from their hive and then
Mhm.
back. So 6 miles round trip. And that's like us going from LA to San Francisco. They'll do it in 12 minutes, 15 minutes, they'll do it multiple
Wow.
times per day. And then yeah, like they somehow organize this task force of thousands of foragers to go to the most prolific beneficial flowers at any given time. And so there's always
Mhm.
these what we call scout bees that are out investigating potential new floral sources, because this landscape is always changing, right? There's always new things coming into bloom, and the bees want to prioritize like what's the best source.
Mhm.
So they're
Mhm.
looking for like a large grouping of the same flower type, like a blooming tree. Certain nectars have more sugar. They're closer If they're closer to the hive, that's a plus because they expend less
Of
energy
course.
going to it.
Right.
So they're
And
kind
they can take a 4-minute shower instead of a 3-minute one, right?
of they're juggling all these different criteria all the time and then somehow communicating and
Right.
reorganizing very quickly to take advantage. Like when you're a beekeeper, if you spill honey on the ground, it's
Mhm.
crazy how fast the bees find that. Like they are
Wow.
on it. And not just the bees whose honey it is, like any bee in the area is like, what?
Interesting.
So their sense of smell, their memory, their ability to like quickly organize around something advantageous is just wild.
Hmm. And they're going, "This crazy human, look what they did. Guys, let's go fix this," right?
Yeah, I have
Wow.
sometimes I'll make like candles and stuff, and if I'm melting wax in the house, I'll turn around and on the screen behind me there'll just be like 30 bees bouncing off the window screen, like, we can smell what you're doing in there. Not ours. Like,
And that's not what you're supposed to be doing with it.
yeah.
You know what? In the book you talked about on their tongue, they even did you say that they can change the location of the hairs on their tongue so they can be able to better lick up things that are more viscous than other things, like thicker and thinner liquids, something like that?
Yeah, they can like readjust their tongue to the viscosity of the nectar. Like they can move the hairs around. And because the tongue is like, it looks like one thing, but it's multiple pieces, they can kind of redesign it to like whatever's the best way to collect it. So, like, I think
Hmm.
right after I finished writing the book, a study came out specifically about this, which I wanted to say in the book, but since there wasn't a study about it yet, I didn't really say it because it was kind of my own theory. But like
Ooh,
they will
okay.
suck the nectar out of the flower and also lap it. So like before we thought they only lapped the nectar, but they're also using their tongue like a straw to suck the nectar out,
Mhm.
and they will adapt, the delicate design to do whichever makes the most sense for the viscosity of the
Mm.
nectar.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty like what blows my mind is like the intricacy, the details, how everything seems to just fit so perfectly. Like the
Yeah.
fact that like for example, as soon as they start leaving their hive, their amount of venom in their body increases because that's when they're going to use the venom. That's when they need it. That's when
Wow.
they might have to defend
Wow.
themselves when they leave the hive. So just
Mm,
little things like that. I'm like, there's so many of
mm.
them. Like, how did this happen?
Wow, so cool. Well, as a Christian, I immediately go, that's the fingerprint of an amazing designer and a creator because I find all of this so fascinating. Not just with bees, like you said, they really are the gateway bug. I mean, when I homeschool my daughters, we started our whole science study for years was just on insects because
Mhm.
there's so much there. Why do you have to even go anywhere else with little kids, you know?
Yeah, it's true.
And I agree so much with what you said that they really are a gateway bug. So it's just incredible. Okay, my mind is blown and I'm going to go back and do some more reading now because there's lots more in your book that you haven't even touched on. And we didn't even get into the soap opera of the Hive. So I
Yeah.
mean, this book, by the time this episode airs, will be available, I'm sure, in every bookstore. Tell people about it, how they can find you, how they can find your book, and all of that.
Yeah, you can order it on my website, which is girlnextdoorhoney.com. It'll be on Amazon, it'll be on Barnes and Noble, any bookstore should probably have it.
Mhm.
And I really love it when people send me pictures of it on the shelves. So if you
There you
follow me on
go.
Instagram, go feel free. It's very fun.
Yes. And
People
it's
are
Girl
like,
Next Door.
it's
Girl
at
Next
Girl
Door.
Next Door Honey.
Okay.
Yeah, on Instagram and all the other socials too.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to enlighten us about some of these mysteries that we still need answers to about bees. Thank you for coming on today, Hillary.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Didn't I tell you? Hillary was just full of the coolest facts about bees, things I never would have imagined. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And, you know, I've been around this earth 55 years, and I kid you not, I feel like every day of my life, even the really difficult ones, in some way, in some form, for at least a few seconds of that day, I have seen evidence of the fingerprints of a loving, creative, imaginative God who has given us so much evidence of his existence, even down to the fact that a bee's tongue can change depending on what it's eating. Like, that's not something that just happens over time, even if you give it billions of years. That's just not something that happens. Like, that's a creator, and it's so cool. And the intricacies of how they tell each other where to get their food not only helps them, but helps us because it has the whole colony going to the same set of flowers every day and pollinating them for our good, for our needs, if it's the flowers on our food. Anyway, I could go on and on. I'm not kidding when I said to Hillary that for with the girls for years I studied insects and I find them fascinating. And we see them every day in some way, right? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. Be sure that you go meet Hillary and go check out this giveaway because her and I want to put the ability for all kinds of great, complex, all natural, delicious sugar in somebody's hands. So go to soulyrested.com/honey and make sure you enter this really sweet giveaway. Soulyrested.com/honey. And thanks for listening, guys. Don't forget. Oh, you know what else? I was going to give you my last line, but there's one more thing. Don't forget about Dehydrating Academy, too. So excited that when this episode comes out, the doors are going to be open and you can dive into this amazing resource. I have poured everything into this for years because I want everybody to understand how dehydrating works, how easy it is, how it simplifies your life, and how amazingly it preserves your food. Go to soulyrested.com/dehydrate and check out Dehydrating Academy at a huge slashed discount with code podcast. And now that brings me around to remember that it's easy to forget how blessed we are to live this life. So enjoy the simple everyday efforts. It's not easy, but it's a good life.